Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Steve. Welcome to All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo.
There's so much to love about this amazing show, and we're happy to connect to fans like us who discover new things with each rewatch.
Be advised, while we aren't gratuitous with spoilers, they can pop up as we discuss character arcs through the final season. Let's get started with Mad Men C to Z.
This is Season 5, Episode 10, Christmas Waltz. This episode was written by Victor Levin and Matthew Weiner and directed by Michael Uppendahl. In the opening scene, we discover Lane has some serious financial troubles related to taxes, and he has to come up with about £3,000 or $8,000 in 2 days. In today's money, that amount would be over $82,000.
Yeah, and this is UK tax problem. So as an expat, Lane is earning in the United States, but he owes money to the UK tax authority. The issue here really is similar to the issue for the firm, which is liquidity.
The financial officer he's talking to is played by Nicholas Guest, and you might recognize him from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation or Star Trek II, but he's also done a lot of voice work. And if you look closely, it's easy to see his resemblance to his brother, Christopher Guest, who is best known for This Is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, or Best in Show.
We also see how Lane is sheltering Rebecca from what's going on. So she comes out during the call, and he's rather rude to her just because I think he wants to keep this to himself, and he doesn't want her to be aware that there is this liquidity problem of raising that kind of cash and paying it.
We see a lot of flashes of anger from Lane, which is relatively rare for him, and it starts right here in this scene with Rebecca. We've never seen him bark at her. Normally, it's just passive-aggressive slights.
I think these flashes of emotion from Lane reflect his growing desperation at his situation. Lane is fairly passive and submissive, so when he snaps, it feels very notable that this emotion is bubbling out.
Next up, we meet Scarlett, Harry's new secretary, who's played by Sadie Alexandru. And from her, we learn Paul Kinsey is in town, and he wants to have lunch with Harry. We haven't seen Paul since the Season 3 finale, Shut the Door, Have a Seat, when they didn't take him with them to start the new company.
And as far as we know, Paul has just bounced around between competing firms in the meantime, so it's going to be interesting to see what Paul is up to.
Lane stops by to get media numbers, and the company seems to be in pretty good shape, but Harry points out what they have are projections, not cash in hand. And what Lane really needs right now is some cash.
And we know that the firm was struggling earlier. It seems to be doing a lot better now, and it doesn't seem to be this ever-present financial pressure. But it does seem that Lane's focus now is on his personal situation.
So next, Lane goes to his friend at the bank to get the company's credit line extended by $50,000. Lane talks about projections again and his holiday plans and their wives. It's a little unsettling that he can walk in and get this extension without any data, but his friend just agrees to it right away and they toast. And you're a financial guy. What kind of risk does this pose to the firm?
The risk is credit risk on the part of the bank. But in a case like this, where you've got a firm that is doing relatively well, yeah, it's got some liquidity issues, but even though Lane explains we've got slow-paying customers, it's probably a gamble that Walt wants to take. You know, you want to be the bank of choice and support firms as they're growing, because as they get bigger and more affluent, they're just great clients, and you can raise a lot of money off of fees and various services you're going to provide.
Next up, it's Pearl Harbor Day, and Roger is drinking to remember and honor, or just because he can. And Pete tells Don and Roger he's got another chance with Jaguar. Lane's friend Edwin left, so they're back in the running. And Don is not very excited about this because they're competing with a lot of other firms, and he actually says, that's a lot of work. And I feel weird siding with Pete, who goes, yeah, you might have to stay past 5:30. But I do side with Pete. Pete is continuing to work hard, and Don is just not feeling it since Megan left. Don has not been feeling it for Season 5.
That's kind of interesting because when Megan was around and Bert accused Don of being on love leave, okay, I think I accept that explanation. But now Megan's out of the office. So what's Don Draper's current excuse? Don was the one who said, hey, let's go off and start our own thing and make it happen. Having an automobile is a foundational piece, certainly a prestige brand. I'm scratching my head a little bit to say, what is your problem, Don? Why don't you want to put your back into this and see if you can make it happen?
In the next scene, Harry goes to meet up with Paul. Paul Kinsey returning to Mad Men. It's amazing. He's joined the Hare Krishna movement, and Harry is absolutely stunned. I read an interview with Brian Batt, who plays Sal Romano, and he talked with Michael Gladys, who plays Paul, about going back to Mad Men for a guest appearance. And these aren't the exact right words, but essentially he said it was wonderful, but heartbreaking, and he didn't recommend it. Basically, going back kind of made it worse to miss it. And apparently, a lot of these office guys are friends in real life, the actors. So I don't know. When I saw Paul, I was excited to see him because he belongs in the cast, right? Like, it was nice to have him back.
I'm amazed at how striking it is to me as a viewer. I feel like I'm looking at him through Harry's eyes. So Paul Kinsey is this madman. He's in a suit. Maybe he's puffing on his pipe and a little pompous, a little arrogant. And now to see him with shaved head in the robes, the robes are a little dirty. It's so striking and surprising. I think this scene does a great job of putting us in Harry's spot, looking at him. We can see that Harry anticipated correctly. Paul does want something, but I don't think Harry anticipated, he wants him to join the Hare Krishnas. Of course, Paul is persuasive and pushy. He wants Harry to come along with him to come to a gathering.
Harry really has his guard up. He resists whatever Paul is offering at multiple stages. But, Harry has always been about scrambling for survival, and if that means fitting in and chanting, so be it. You remember when they heard the company was being sold to the Brits, and Harry said, regime change is always tricky, you want to stay neutral? And Paul's response was, what's wrong with you? Aren't you loyal to anyone? I'm going to go with no. Harry is completely a creature of sucking up and scraping for every single advantage, and he doesn't have a lot of principles because he's so busy trying to impress whoever is in the room. So it's interesting because Harry and Paul are both really naked strivers, but Harry doesn't need a moral code. I feel like he just wants to be left standing. But Paul, I think, does want to believe in a system that's righteous and moral. But whether it's civil rights or going without material things or defending Penn Station, taking a stand is pretty inconvenient. And so Paul has a hard time with it too.
I have to admit, Harry is a real guilty pleasure for me in this series. He's a relatively minor character, but I enjoy him so much. I think the character is so believable. And the other piece of magic I think that makes Harry so interesting to me, just like Pete Campbell, we see elements of ourself, maybe elements that we fear or loathe in ourself, but we see them through Harry and Peter. That makes him grate on me and irritate me more than he would if I didn't have similar concerns. Any of us, if asked the question, we'd say, no, I never want to be like Harry, and I'd never want to be like Pete Campbell. But I think we all have elements of ambition. We're just not as separate from these two loathsome characters as we'd like to be.
Harry's always looking for what is the angle, and when Paul introduces Mother Lakshmi, he goes, oh, I get it. So he's like, all right, now I see why you're hanging out here. Mother Lakshmi is played by Anna Wood, and every single time I watch this episode, I think it's Juliette Lewis, even though I know better. You might have seen Anna in 911 Nashville, The Code, Madam Secretary, or Reckless, along with Michael Gladys, who plays Paul.
Yeah, I think Anna Wood is really well cast in this role because she definitely has sex appeal. And at the same time, there's another element there. There's something more going on with this Mother Lakshmi character. As the chanting begins and he's getting into it, I found myself looking at Paul thinking, okay, how much of this is he really interested in the movement? How much of it is related to Mother Lakshmi? And where's Harry going to land in this? Because they get Harry to join in the chanting.
Well, Lakshmi and Paul are so insistent that Harry join them. you do feel that uncomfortable. Like, what is the grift here? What are they trying to get him into? It is funny how I don't really associate myself with Harry, that you do go into this with his eyes. At least I did. And so here you are in an unusual situation, and you've got Mother Lakshmi on one side of you and Paul on the other. And so what does he do? Of course, he follows the crowd and he gets into it.
And she's very flirty, right? Like, she's up in Harry's face, she's very close to him. So you get a sense that she knows what her appeal is, and she's gonna leverage that. And is Harry cut very much from the same cloth as Paul? Yeah, I think he is, and I think she can read that in fairly short order.
Back at the partners meeting, Lane is obsessed with getting approval for bonuses, and he says they have a surplus of $50,000. If by surplus you mean credit extension, yes, Lane. I always felt sorry for Lane. He isn't the most popular guy, and we saw how the Brits and his father ignored his wishes and kind of ran over him. He always seems lonely. He just had that fight with Pete in front of the partners. His marriage has been rocky. I mean, he has a cool accent and he has perseverance going for him, but fiction does not teach us that this guy is going to be the villain. He's an underdog, so normally in a story, he'd be the hero who overcomes great odds. So watching him here be so sneaky and try to manipulate everything is not okay, but then you also watch how the partners just kind of breeze right past him. Lane is somebody who's always ignored, basically. Even though he's trying to do something nefarious, I still feel sorry for him.
And we see another flash of anger here as he interrupts Pete. And we can feel that Pete Lane tension rapidly building. And this time, unlike the prior time, Don Draper steps in to squish that and say, let's not let this get out of hand and end up in fisticuffs again.
Pete's snap to Lane here is, what ghost visited you, Ebenezer? I saw this meeting slightly differently because they're all coming to it with their own personal wishes. The difference is that Lane is trying to keep his secret. So Pete is obsessed, nakedly ambitious about Jaguar and having credit for it. And Don is just trying to not be irritated by Peggy complaining. You know, nobody's really thinking about a larger system benefit.
It shows the dysfunction among the partners at the firm, right? We've got a bunch of individuals with agendas or completely silent. That's no way to run a railroad.
But Lane could say right here that he needs to take his bonus as soon as possible to cover his taxes. And I feel like the partners would probably be okay with that. And I know he has his pride, but
I don't think he can say that. I agree with you practically, factually, you're correct. But that would be totally humiliating. Hey, guys, I really need the money to clear my UK taxes, of which they're going to be oblivious to and have no idea that there is this issue. But this isn't the forum to do it.
So Lane is very disappointed with the outcome of this meeting, but so is Pete, because he wanted everybody to cheer about the possibility of getting Jaguar. Bert's reaction is also disappointing because all he says is, they're lemons, they never start. And that's going to be relevant soon.
The next scene reveals where our missing partner is. We've got Roger chatting up Scarlett. He's in a Hawaiian shirt. He's clearly inebriated. He's so annoying that Joan comes out of her office.
Unlike Roger's flirting with Clara to see Pete's schedule, this seems to be more genuine flirting, and Joan squashes that quickly. When they speak privately, Roger tells Joan Jane won't get everything in the divorce. He will pay for Kevin through college, and Joan is not having it. So this is definitive proof that Roger does know Kevin is his baby, which we suspected when she brought Kevin to the office, but we didn't know conclusively. And Joan is a single mother. Roger is separating from Jane. It would be easy for her to go down this road, to take his money, to manage Roger with the flirting. She knows he's a good time. But she has always known Roger's flaws, and they haven't changed. And Joan is relying on herself for her future, which is quite a turnaround from season 1 Joan.
Yeah, and I think it's another clear indication that when Joan said things were over with Roger, she really meant it. And even at the cost of not getting this child support from Roger, she wants to maintain that total control and keep him at arm's length, and that's the price she's willing to pay. So I think it's such a clear sign to really draw a red line in the sand to say, don't cross this, Roger Sterling. He seems a little down at receiving that line, but he does seem to accept it. It's Joan's decision, so he can't claim that he didn't understand or anything else.
Back with Paul, Harry, and Mother Lakshmi, the chant is vigorous and Harry is really into it when it stops. And immediately, he's ready to go. But Paul says, no, let's go get some food together. And again, I feel so suspicious of Lakshmi and what she wants from Harry because she and Paul seem so fixated on having him participate. And all right, what is it? What is it you're looking for out of him?
Knowing what we know, I'm trying to make sense of that because it seems like she's about to realize he's a threat to pull Paul out of the thing and tells him, hey, stay away. So I guess I'm struggling with what is her motivation at this point, that Harry is a potential convert and not a threat to pull Paul out. And then later he becomes a threat. And then she's like, I got to shut Harry down and block him. I don't know.
We talked previously about Megan's father, Emil, railing against materialism. And here it comes up again in a lecture against a material life. And I never tied Paul's Krishna life to Lane before, but we see Lane has overspent. He's not focused on human connection. So maybe this caution from the Hare Krishna leader seems like a faint warning to Lane through this episode. So now we see Paul and Harry in a cab together. Harry gets that Paul is into Lakshmi, but he asks if Paul is being forced to stay. And for all his chanting and pretense of being at peace, Paul confesses he wants to leave. He's grateful to the movement, but he doesn't want to have to live like that to love God. And I don't know a lot about the movement, but it seems like austerity is a pretty key pillar. So Paul's saying, it's great, but I don't like the austerity. It's kind of like Roger saying being an account man is the best job in the world, except for the clients. It all goes together.
And I think Paul is quite candid in this conversation. He admits that he hit rock bottom, that he failed at business. These are hard things to lay out there, I think, especially to someone like Harry, who he hasn't seen in a while, and he does turn on that he loves Lakshmi, but his take is that she won't leave the Hare Krishnas due to her background and, what she suffered in her past.
Next, we see Megan and Don at a play called America Hurrah, which opened in November of 1966. It uses some experimental techniques, including 3 connected one-act plays. We'll link to more details about it on the Christmas Waltz episode page of our website, madmenctz.com. And Don has no sense of curiosity or humor about this play, which is pretty severe on television and advertising. And it feels like a much more sensitive topic for him since Megan left the office, but I can't imagine him ever enjoying this.
No, I think he hates it. It's a direct shot at his entire professional existence. So even though we know he's not exactly that engaged and devoted to it at the present time, it's got to be a central facet of his sense of identity. I think that identity is not central to her existence. So to her, it can be more of esoteric philosophic discussion. But for Don, this hits close to the heart.
So when Don and Megan get home, Don is being very churlish. He's giving one-word answers. I happen to agree with his critique of the play. He talks about it punching the audience in the face with its subtle message. But he's hiding behind that as the complaint. Because the truth is, Megan's right. He is absolutely okay if anybody makes fun of any profession, including acting. But if she and her friends have anti-advertising sentiments, it bothers him.
We also see Don has lingering pain about Megan leaving the firm, and he makes sort of a snide remark that no one has taken a stronger stand against advertising than you. As much as he's tried to do the right thing and say the right things to her, it seems like he's still feeling the pain from her departure.
Yes, it's so childish of him to say that line, no one's made a stronger stand against advertising than you. Yes, Don, Megan, as that one coupon writer, really stuck it to the industry. When you agree to something with your partner, it's so immature to turn around and fling the parts you don't like at them, because Don agreed to support Megan quitting copywriting and being an actress. It's one thing for him to be oversensitive about seeing a play with her that criticizes advertising, but then to turn around and fling shots like this, it's cheap.
In the next scene, we have Harry and Paul talking in a restaurant. And now we finally get to see why Paul had looked up Harry in the first place. He's got a script for Star Trek, and he wants Harry to pass it along and get it looked at by the right people.
This is one case where having Harry as your friend would be a good thing. He is pretty well positioned to help in this particular way. I like the moment when Harry says, when he was chanting, he saw his daughter's face float by, and the blatant envy on Paul's face when he says, "Really? You had a vision?" It's so true to form. They're both so competitive.
And we get more candor here from Paul as he opens up a little bit. So I think that jealousy that he hasn't had a vision, kicks it off. But then he talks about this script being the most meaningful thing he's written, that he isn't happy, he can't clear his head, he doesn't fit in, nobody likes him except for Lakshmi. For this Hare Krishna membership and what it supposedly should be giving him in terms of inclusion, belonging, spiritual peace, it's clear Paul has none of those things. So he's feeling a little sorry for himself in this scene. And I feel a little sorry for him as well because, yeah, this is a guy who struggled in the business side. He's now joined the Hare Krishnas, and that's not working out. And the one thing he is locked onto at this point, Lakshmi, can't be separated from the Hare Krishnas.
Yeah, I find this really tragic. Even as Paul admits Hare Krishna isn't working for him, that he lost his state of bliss and he's so busy keeping track of who likes him that nobody likes him. I feel really sad to see Paul end up here. But in a way, he was always here. So he says, "Remember how anxious and insecure I was?" But we discover that's all still there. It's just that before he was wearing a suit, and maybe the suit hid it a little bit better. Maybe I find Paul a little more forgivable than Harry because he's slightly more self-aware, even though he's also petty. I think he does want to be a person who dreams noble dreams, but he also wants everybody to admire his nobility. And Harry doesn't care about being noble. He's just constantly measuring where he is on the ladder.
Yeah, and I think Paul is definitely smarter than Harry and better able to assess his own life and situation.
Back at the empty office, Lane carefully forges Don Draper's signature on a check to himself for $7,500. There's no dialogue in this scene, but it is one of the most memorable scenes in the series. The expression on Jared Harris's face, the physical movements he makes. There's not a sense of relief or even anxiety. It looks like resignation. This is something that has to be done. And to me, it's really frustrating because I can't help just thinking there is a simpler option. Just talk about it with the partners, get some help, but now you've reduced yourself to this.
For somebody in the finance and accounting field to forge a signature on a company check, that is a bright red line. Maybe you don't know what the comeuppance will be when and if this is discovered, but there is no going back. You've really crossed over at this point. And I think someone like Lane professionally knows just how lost he has become. In the commentary, they talked about, as he's holding the check and waving it for the ink to dry, it's almost like Lane waving goodbye. And I think in terms of being a finance and accounting professional, this act of fraud really is symbolically him waving goodbye to the profession, because if it's ever found out, he's done.
Well, and I think we could definitely read it as this is what takes him to his ultimate goodbye. The next day, Harry pops in to ask Peggy why she didn't hire Paul Kinsey when she hired Ginsberg, and he asks her to read Paul's script for a second opinion. Harry knows the script is bad, but Peggy is surprised to register that Harry genuinely wants to help Paul. And Peggy is not sentimental. She says the best help is to be honest and tell him to write a better script. And when Harry says, "Oh, I think it was hard for him," Peggy goes, "Then he shouldn't be doing it." She has officially converted into a Manhattan elite. She belongs, she judges who doesn't cut it. And just as we talked about how much Joan has changed since the first season, Peggy has come a long way. She's almost unrecognizable from the girl Paul toured around the office and tried to impress with his Twilight Zone impression.
Peggy has no friendship or personal ties to Paul, so it's very easy to be very objective. And maybe this is why Harry is soliciting this from Peggy, because somewhere deep down inside, Harry needs the objective, hard answer. It does seem to give Harry some clarity, though.
So Pete went to drive a Jaguar, and now he goes to Don to tell him to visit. Take Megan, he suggests. And Pete points out rightly that last year, if they had been in the running for a car, Don would have been elated. But Don is not feeling work the way he used to. So you can just see Pete poking at him like Don is an engine that won't start to say, hey, come on, where are you? Let's go.
And I think the unspoken thing in this scene is, for all the tension and friction between Pete and Don, Pete really values Don's presence. He is the brand, the creative brand on the masthead of their firm. He's what Pete is selling out there in those meetings with various clients, the brilliance of Don Draper. So when the motor that is Don Draper isn't running or is sputtering, that's problematic for Pete, because Don is at the heart of what they're trying to sell for the firm. So yeah, Pete is puzzled, but I think wrapped up in that puzzlement probably has to be some concern as well, because without Don Draper, where are they?
In the next quick scene, we see Lane calling his accountant. He's got the money so he can stay out of jail, and all of it's going to cover his taxes.
I like how Lane hangs up on the tax lawyer when he mentions his fee. Lane says, oh yeah, we'll look after that, and hangs it up. Even if he can extricate himself from the immediate need to pay the UK tax authority, creditors and debts are piled up at Lane's door.
Next, Joan gets called to reception, where she receives divorce papers from Greg. And Joan unloads on Meredith, and we've never seen Joan lose her cool in the office. But she's yelling in the lobby, she throws a model plane, and it's just embarrassment, right? Even though I think Meredith is so clueless, no one would really have known what Joan's papers were about if she hadn't thrown a tantrum.
Well, I think it's just misplaced anger, because Joan's not hard to find. She's going to get served. Her ex-husband wants to formalize the divorce. So even the fact that Meredith allowed for her to get served like this, what's Joan's point? That she could have avoided it indefinitely if not for the foolishness of Meredith? So to me, it's just an emotional outburst of frustration.
Don is on his way out to visit Jaguar, and he catches Joan's meltdown and pulls her bodily toward the elevators. And she won't tell him what's going on, but she's not somebody who acts like this at work. So he knows whatever it is has to be a big deal.
Yeah, it's like when the person who never yells, everybody pays attention because this person never yells. Whereas the yeller, yeah, they're yelling again, whatever. Like, what are they yelling about this time? It's always something.
So Joan and Don show up at the Jaguar dealer, and Don was a car salesman. So here's some deja vu from when he bought the Cadillac. He's the confident man who's come a long way. Ultimately, he writes the guy a check for $6,000 to drive the E-Type. And he's so cavalier and cool about it, like the ability to spend an obscene amount, if he wanted to, on something so showy. And of course, it reminds us again, he could and probably would write a check to Lane if he asked for it.
It just draws such a contrast between a senior partner and a junior partner's financial situation. Roger is just bleeding money and making settlements and buying apartments. Don Draper can write this giant check just to cover a car in case he doesn't come back. And here's Lane scratching and struggling to try and find a way to cover a tax bill. So it's really two different worlds. The other thing I'll say about this scene is I love those E-Types, and that Arrest Me Red E-Type in the showroom just looks so gorgeous. And especially coming into the next scene when it's parked in front of the bar on the street. What a gorgeous automobile.
The E-Type was based on Jaguar's D-Type race car that won Le Mans in 1955 and the next couple years. The Jaguar E-Type continues to be a favorite on classic car lists by aficionados, and we'll put some links on our website for that. Just for context, the movie Ford versus Ferrari, that Le Mans race is set in 1966, which is the same year this episode of Mad Men is. So they test drove the Jaguar, and now Don and Joan are in a bar with the car parked out front. I feel like this scene with Don and Joan is something the writers are doing more for the fans than they're doing for the story. But it's the kind of indulgence I can forgive because we almost never get these two characters together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have to admit it's a guilty pleasure of mine as a viewer, because the two of them are commiserating about where they are in their lives and how they're not as young as they used to be. it feels like there's a real respect between the two of them. They've come through the battles, they've had their success, they've still got their problems. Maybe Don appears at least to be in a better position at present than Joan, but the struggle continues. It's just a great scene between the two of them that I really enjoy, probably far more than any significance it might have to any plot line.
Don confesses he was scared of Joan when he started working there, and that Bert Peterson advised him Joan was the one person he shouldn't cross. And I love that trivia. I wish in the flashbacks that we see for Don Draper, we had seen more about when Don first started working at Sterling Cooper, because I would really love to see that.
And Joan's laments are kind of heartbreaking. She used to be someone that was admired, and the flowers came for her. Now she's alone with the baby, needing to get through this divorce. Joan really doesn't have a clear vision of how she's going to proceed here. So she knows this challenge is in front of her, and she seems determined to take it on, and she's turning away the costs that would come with allowing Roger to fund things. But she doesn't have a clear answer of how things get better for her. And that's a tough spot to be in. And I think that's behind a lot of the anger in her earlier freak out on Meredith.
Yes, it's really unsettling. And it's not just the divorce, it's that her place in the office is changing. She has more professional credibility, but she's not the belle of the ball, and she knows how to play that part really well. So I think it is really uncomfortable, and I love that the show lets us see that. Don says he remembers all the flowers Joan used to get in the office, and he says he thought she was dating Ali Khan, and that's a prince who married Rita Hayworth.
And we know like a major theme of Mad Men overall is this new generation and the effect it has on society and the business, but as well the effect it has on the prior generations who have to move aside and make space for this new one, the baby boomers coming up. And this is a great scene, I think, that sort of surveys the personal consequences of that.
Earlier, we talked about the essence of Pete Campbell in one line in that scene in the brothel where she offers, "You're my king," and that works for him. And I think this scene has the line that's the essence of Joan's story. She replies to Don about the flowers, "My mother raised me to be admired." The end of her story was supposed to be a handsome prince. Her story was supposed to be marrying Ali Khan. And I feel oddly proud of her that she learns to want more than that, even though it's a lot harder. Back at the office, Meredith informs Harry, "There's a Lakshmi here to see you. She's got a whole story." And that line might be Meredith's best line in the whole series. Of course, after Joan's reaction, Meredith would do more vetting of guests in the reception.
As Lakshmi comes into Harry's office, she's instantly flirting with him. She's burning for him, and it's not a problem. Like, they share everything. Of course, Harry is really digging this because we know he's attracted to her. So very quickly, things get intimate right there in the office on the desk.
I think when Lakshmi walks in, Harry suspects she wants to recruit him, and then it turns out she actually wants sex. This feels like the guy fantasy Pete didn't get in the previous episode with Beth. It's not realistic. I mean, okay. And Harry makes some noise about resisting her, but he doesn't give any allegiance to Paul or to Jennifer. Of course, he caves instantly. If Allison were here, she could honestly say Harry is not a good person.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to throw rocks at Harry here, but Lakshmi is dead on with this male fantasy for Harry. And again, I just trying to think of a scenario where he says, "No, Lakshmi, please take a seat. I'm not that kind of boy."
I just don't think this serves any point in the plot. I mean, other than making him feel guilty and wanting to help Paul a little bit more later, I don't know that we needed this, but all right.
Back at the bar, Dawn asks Joan to dance. And as we know from earlier in the series, there were so many occasions where Betty wanted to dance, and Don Draper was always making excuses about not wanting to the point where Betty started to make excuses that she didn't want to dance because she didn't want to have the rejection from Dawn. But here we see Dawn trying to be a friend to Joan. What did you think of that?
I think Dawn is being kind to Joan by paying her attention, but I almost get the sense that if she had said yes to dancing, something might have happened between them, and it's Joan's no that keeps it from being a tragedy. I don't know if you had any anxiety that something romantic might happen between them when you first watched it, but I did. I could not enjoy this scene because I did not want anything to happen between them. But we've been with Don for 5 seasons. It seemed likely, so I was glad it didn't.
Yeah, I like it on the rewatch because I know nothing's going to happen. So then I can just enjoy this flirty behavior that I know isn't going to end up in that place where on the first time I'm worried about it because that wouldn't be good for either of them. So this time through, I do think it's a bit of them pantomiming their old selves and old behaviors with someone who's a friend without a risk of it going too far the other direction. So it almost feels like nostalgia between the two of them for some of the things they're lamenting, which are no longer the case in the earlier conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's their ability to enjoy that nostalgia together, but it's also a really intimate conversation because Don quotes Bobby Barrett's line to Joan about somebody once told me I like being bad and then going home and being good. He doesn't say who told him that, even though Joan was covering Don's desk as his secretary at that time. And Joan has a line where she says about the woman waiting at home, the only sin she's committed is being familiar. And that's certainly been true for Don, and they both know it.
And when Joan says that about the sin of the woman at home being familiar, it's not a shot at Don. She's not trying to stick him on that. But if I'm Don Draper hearing that, I'm going to hear my conscience. It's such a candid scene. And I think in this episode where we've seen Paul bearing his heart to Harry and now these two, it's a bit of a contrast for Mad Men because so often we've got the characters putting on an air or trying to pitch something rather than being truly honest about their feelings or where they're at. Dawn is notorious for this. And Joan has certainly had her fair share of it as well over the 4.5 seasons.
It's such an intimate conversation. Don looks at Joan and says of the man, he doesn't know what he wants, but he's wanting. And this moment seems like he might still be trying for something with Joan more than he's making an argument. I see both things happening there in that moment. And Joan pushes back. There's not any question for her that she's going to do this. She says, he knows. It's just the way he is. And there's no judgment in that on her part. And then she adds, maybe it's just the way she is. And if I'm reading that correctly, that's Joan saying, maybe a woman's need to step out and have fun is just how she's built. And that seems like a very personal thing for her to reveal.
I do want to say that in the commentary, Matthew Weiner cops to wanting the audience to worry that these two are going to hook up, Don and Joan, not the third party dude. It's a great scene, and I like the way it ends, where Don sort of portrays the failed bar flirt who now has to leave without Joan, leaving her there with some money. Again, it just seems very kind, like when he put his coat on her over by the elevators before they headed out because she didn't have it. And then now where he gives her some car money so that she has an option to end her evening the way she chooses to. And again, I don't feel there's any judgment or expectation on his part here. He's just being a friend to set her up to make whatever decision she chooses to make. And I think it is ambiguous which way she's going to go. You know, is she interested? Does she want to have that sort of escape? Does she not? I don't know the answer.
It's such a relief to see Don being a nice guy and being a good friend because Pete over and over looks to Don for friendship and Don refuses that to him. But here, even though Joan would not have expected it or asked Don for it, he offers it to her, and it's a lovely gift. We also see Don with a kind of empty expression shifting the Jaguar into top speed, drunk on his way home. So this is him wanting again. This is him restless.
Yeah, and in the commentary, I think Matthew Weiner calls it his sexual release, rowing through the gears on the E-Type. So 3-pedal life as a substitute. But at least he's not cheating on Megan.
Back in Harry's office, Lakshmi threatens Harry to leave Paul alone. She accuses Harry of wanting to make Paul into a gross materialist. But I feel like Paul got there without Harry's help. And I don't understand the point of this visit, but Harry and Lakshmi agree the script is terrible. And it is hard to argue Harry is being a good friend here, but he is thinking about Paul a little bit. He defends his position that Paul wants a life with her. And when she says, oh, that's not possible, he asks, why don't you just let him go? And her answers start out about being Paul living in the spiritual world. But then she ends up going, he's a really good closer.
Yeah, and it's quite the transformation because I think in the prior scene, at least on the first watch, you think, oh, okay, maybe Lakshmi really is interested in Harry, or she's that devoted to recruiting that she's going to use herself to lure another madman into the Hare Krishnas. Here, it's very clear, like it's none of that. She's trading on what she's got in order to get what she wants and make an exchange with Harry for fear of Paul exiting. Unlike Paul's thought that, oh, she's insecure and can't leave the movement, but, she loves him, etc. It's clear here she doesn't. She's devoted to the movement and she's very conscious and in control of how she's manipulating Paul. And now is her attempt to manipulate Harry. It's when she slaps Harry, when he makes a snide remark about, didn't you already trade away the thing you have? It's clear she knows how to deal with men. She knows how to deal with passive, weak men like Harry, and she's not going to take any guff.
Guff.
See, how could that be AI? Guff. The AI doesn't even know about guff.
There's a truth call out at the end of this scene. Lakshmi agrees with Peggy. Harry should tell Paul the truth about his script. But we know Harry is not great with the truth. In fact, you could argue that if he had told somebody the truth about Lee Garner Jr., Sal might still be working there. The prospect that Harry is actually going to face Paul with the truth is pretty unlikely. So next we see Megan waiting at home with a glass of wine and a plate of sauceless pasta. Do we call that Montreal spaghetti? We know this scene from Betty and Don. Megan's got dinner waiting, and Don comes in drunk and late. He never called. So we've seen that a million times before. But at least he's honest about where he was. He says he went for a drink with Joan. He says he returned the Jaguar, so we know he's not keeping that. And when she insists he sit down to dinner with her, he does.
He's not looking to lock horns with Megan, and she's very determined and holding him to account. So even if he has a good excuse for being late, he doesn't have an excuse for not at least calling home to let her know. And I think she makes a good point there because she is at home and waiting for him. So it would be an easy courtesy from the bar to give her a call. And I think the lack of fight from him is probably the best approach here because she's ready to go further, I think, than just throwing the plate of food against the wall.
Megan gets to the heart of what's wrong for Don. She tells him, you used to love your work. You loved it before you ever met me. And there are a couple of different problems operating here because Megan is not loving the struggle of her new acting life and taking a few classes, going to a few auditions, and then not having somewhere to be. So her father said, you got this success without the struggle, where here's the struggle, and it's not fun. And then Don has been whiny since Megan left. She drops him a truth bomb. He loved work, he can love it again, and he needs to find that love for it. And I think it's very generous that in her hurt feelings, she can remind him to find his passion for his work, for something beyond their relationship. And it's not that she's shoving him away. She's encouraging him to be his true self.
And there's a parallel here, I think, with Joan's life. Joan is at a crossroads where she needs to figure out how she's going to go forward, and she's not exactly sure. I think, Don's response to her when she says that he used to love his work and he says it's different now, to me indicates a similar lack of clarity. He's, okay, Don, it's different now. What does that mean? Are you going to do something else? Are you going to reinvest in it? Are you going to take it in a new way? What will you do? And I think Megan does a good job here of posing the question to him that he needs to ask, which is, okay, it's different now. What are you going to do next? And I don't think at this moment Don Draper has an answer.
Next, we get a scene with Rebecca and Lane. Lane doesn't want to go to England for Christmas. Rebecca suspects it's financial. But she ends up being really supportive with his excuse about he wants to stay in town to get Jaguar. And we get a very crucial reminder here because Lane's friend Edwin left Jaguar and Rebecca says, oh, that's why they left in a hurry. Because without his job, he'd lose his visa. And so Edwin had to go back to England.
I always think of their marriage as being terrible. And I guess as a viewer, sort of rooting for Lane to be free of it, that she represents that plastic cage of his life England and his unhappiness with it and all the rest. But she is such a great partner here. I mean, she's trying to raise his morale. She says how proud and happy she is. She totally takes the change in plans in stride. And we know she desperately wants to get back to England for the holidays, but the fact that she can't, she's going to put on a brave face and just be really supportive. She knows the pressure he's under. Rebecca shows so well in this scene. It just hurts because we know the torment that Lane's in and the line he's crossed at this point. And yet here she is doing everything she can to be a committed partner and support him.
Yes, Rebecca's the only female partner in this episode who doesn't have a physical outburst. There was Joan throwing the airplane at Meredith and Megan throwing the plate of pasta at the wall and Lakshmi slapping Harry, so a lot of violence happening. The next day, Roger brings roses into Joan, but they're not from him. He's a smidge jealous, and when Joan opens the card, it says, "Your mother did a good job, Ali Khan." Meaning, my mother raised me to be admired. This is such a sweet gesture from Don. I don't think he's doing it to start a relationship, to make Roger jealous, or anything other than making Joan feel better. And I think this might only be the second time Don Draper does something that doesn't benefit him or wound an opponent. Something pure. I think the first time is when he looks out for the kid from Hialeah. And I cannot think of any ulterior motive for Don to send Joan roses. This was the gift she wished Roger had sent when he sent that masseuse to her house, something without strings, something just for her, just because.
It's a really classy move by Don Draper, and having crapped all over him again and again for his bad behavior, this one is solid gold, and I think it really matters to Joan, and I think it's cementing a bond and a friendship between the two of them. Going back to Roger Sterling, I think the flowers have almost the opposite effect upon him. He's really realizing now that any hopes he has of getting back with Joan are off. This isn't going to happen. He's missed the boat. That makes him sad, and he's only thinking about himself. He hasn't given a thought about Joan's situation and how she might be feeling. It's all about Roger all the time.
Then Harry meets Paul about his script. And we know Harry is very loose with the truth, so he's decided to say the script is really, really good, but they can't buy it and Paul can't ever contact them. But they loved it. And Harry does this because he thinks it's the kindest thing for Paul. And maybe it is.
It's kind of a terrible lie, and I think as Paul stews on it, he's going to figure out this is all untrue and doesn't make any sense. But in the moment, we can see that emotional desperation from Paul. So he's very unquestioning. I think he's got the compliment and the excitement that they liked his writing. And then this weird, nonsensical reason why they can't proceed and he can never reach out to them. He hasn't put that together yet. The kind part here, though, I think, is Harry puts his money where his mouth is and has $500 of cash and a ticket to Los Angeles and encourages Paul to head out there and try and make his dream of being a writer come true, which will save him from the Hare Krishnas. Although he's done it dishonestly, I think Harry's done it with the best of intentions here. That's a lot of money back then, much more than it is now. And for somebody in Paul's situation, it's an especially large sum of money.
And Harry wants Paul to get on the bus right away. He says, if you go back to Lakshmi, you won't be strong enough to leave. That's pretty altruistic for Harry. But when he says, this failure, this life, it'll all seem like it happened to someone else, it absolutely echoes what Don told Peggy in the hospital, but it seems a little out of character for Harry. I do like it when Harry says, leave your things and go from here. And Paul goes, I don't have any things. But you remember him with his pipe and his special wine glass at his party, and how that was also a costumed past life for Paul. And I find it really sad.
It's a really sweet moment when Paul hugs Harry, and you just feel like it's really coming from his heart when he tells Harry that he's the first one who did something for him. And I think that really sums up the loneliness of Paul's life. We know why Harry's doing this, and it just emphasizes how alone Paul is and how he struggled to find his people, his place, and fit in. So it's such a sweet moment. And also, I can't say I'm very well disposed towards Paul most of the time, but I do admit that I'm feeling a little sorry for him and hoping that he can turn things around and get to a better place.
Back at the office, the partners call everyone together for some announcements. And now that Mohawk is on strike, the partners quickly decide they'll still give bonuses, but the partners won't take them. I have to think the way the partners are talking past Lane is part of his frustration because nobody pauses or takes him seriously about it. But he is so desperate. He really, really needs this bonus to happen. And they have no clue why.
The machinist strike at Mohawk, is going to mean suspending all their advertising work. So this is going to further hurt the cash flow of the firm. It's really just a perfect storm for Lane. Nothing is going right. And this last escape hatch that he thought he could engineer, it turns out it's a dead end.
So the partners share their announcements. They're in the running for Jaguar. Mohawk's going on strike. They're getting Christmas bonuses. And then Don steps up to give a motivational speech. He seems to pull from what Pete said earlier about how last year he would have given anything for a chance at a car, and also from what Megan said about him loving work. And now he's leaning in. This is the successful ad man, Don Draper, everybody wants to see. And he ends with creative in my office. I don't think we've heard that at all this season before now. So Don Draper's back at work. And like McNulty from The Wire, we don't know if him being back at work is the best thing for Don Draper, the human, but the rest of the machine benefits a lot from him being there.
It's fun that there's such a contrast, too, between the motivational speech of Don Draper with the comments earlier from Lane, where he talks about the deferment of the bonuses and the employees don't even understand it. So Roger has to interject that, hey, it means you get your bonuses, but we don't. And then when Pete talks about landing Jaguar, and that just lands completely flat and nobody says much of anything. And I think Pete intended it to be sort of a raw moment, and it just goes over terribly. And now Don gives them a true raw moment, and there's, broad applause. The person I noticed who was most thrilled with what Don Draper said was Pete Campbell. There's his boy. There's his horse. This is the creative heart of the firm. This is what he sells in those meetings. And that Don Draper is back in the saddle, apparently, and eager to grab this Jaguar opportunity.
The closing song is Nellie McKay's Christmas Waltz. If you haven't already discovered them, there are Spotify playlists featuring every song featured across the entire run of Mad Men from each episode. David Carbonara, who composed the instrumental music in the show, we've also linked to his website on our resources page on our website, madmenctz.com. Our listener shout-out today goes to Jessica E. Thank you so much for taking a minute to share positive feedback about our show through our website. It is so kind of everybody to keep listening and sending such thoughtful messages. We really thank you for all your support.
That's it for this episode of All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo. Visit our website, madmenctz.com, to vote for your favorite Sterling lines and to share your opinions on our double dip questions for each episode.
You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at madmenctz, and please listen, like, and subscribe. That's what the podcast's for.
Thanks for listening, everybody.